The words hit me like stones. I had barely spoken, just a small correction, a reminder about his youngest forgetting her homework. But Daniel's eyes flared, his face red with irritation, and he snapped at me as though I were a nuisance in my own home. "Keep your mouth shut, you're embarrassing." The sound of the door slamming after him rattled through the walls, shaking the picture frames and my heart in equal measure. The silence afterward was heavier than the outburst. Evelyn, his wife, sat smirking on the couch, her legs crossed neatly, her glass of wine balanced on one knee. "You should listen," she said coolly. "It's humiliating for him when you butt in. Honestly, you should be grateful he even lets you stay here. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video." I felt my cheeks burn. I wanted to say something, remind her of the years I worked double shifts to keep Daniel fed, of the nights I went hungry so he wouldn't, but my tongue pressed heavy against the back of my teeth. Words had no place in that house anymore. The grandchildren glanced at me nervously before scurrying upstairs, their laughter muted, their footsteps quick as though they knew the air was dangerous. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, pretending to study the lines in the carpet, pretending I hadn't just been reduced to nothing in front of my own family. That night, in my small room at the end of the hall, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His words replayed over and over. "Keep your mouth shut, you're embarrassing." My chest ached with the weight of them. I thought of all the times I had stayed silent for his sake, through his tantrums as a boy, through his mistakes as a man. I had swallowed my pride for decades, believing silence was love. But as the hours dragged and the house creaked in the dark, something inside me shifted. Silence, I realized, wasn't love anymore. It was surrender. And I had surrendered too much. The next morning, I rose early. The house was still, the sun just barely breaking across the blinds. I moved quietly, my hands steady, my face calm. I didn't slam doors, didn't shout. I simply began. Daniel thought he had silenced me with humiliation, with slammed doors and cruel words. He thought I would shrink smaller and smaller until I disappeared completely. But he had no idea what was coming next. The next few days moved like slow poison. Daniel barely looked at me except when he needed something. His shirt ironed, his tie fetched, his children watched. Evelyn, on the other hand, looked at me constantly, her eyes scanning me like I was an insect crawling across her polished kitchen floor. Every time I opened my mouth, she found a way to cut me down. On Tuesday evening, I tried to ask the children about school. "How was your spelling test?" I asked gently, smiling at my granddaughter. Evelyn's fork clinked loudly against her plate as she interrupted. "Didn't Daniel tell you? Don't butt in. Don't embarrass us. The kids don't need your constant questions." Daniel didn't even look up from his food. He just muttered, "She's right, Mom. Stop making things awkward." Awkward. That word stung worse than any insult. Awkward meant I didn't belong. Awkward meant I was an intrusion in the very home my sacrifices had built. On Wednesday, Evelyn had her friends over. She poured them wine in tall crystal glasses and laughed loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I tried to slip quietly past the living room to the kitchen, but she noticed me immediately. "Oh, there's Margaret," she said with a smirk. "Our live-in embarrassment. She doesn't say much, which is probably for the best." The room filled with giggles, sharp and shallow. One woman asked, "Why do you keep her here then?" Evelyn didn't miss a beat. "Cheap labor. Babysitting and laundry for the price of a bedroom. A bargain." Their laughter rolled over me, sticky and cruel. I didn't flinch, not this time. I simply nodded politely and carried on, placing the tray of folded laundry on the table, as though their laughter meant nothing. Inside, though, I felt the ground shifting. Every word Evelyn spoke, every insult Daniel allowed to hang in the air, was fuel. By Thursday, I had stopped waiting for kindness. I moved differently. My silence was no longer submission. It was study. I watched Daniel. I watched Evelyn. I noticed the things they didn't think I saw. Evelyn slipping receipts into her purse, Daniel glancing nervously at letters he tucked quickly into drawers, the way their voices dropped into hushed arguments after midnight when they thought I was asleep. I started waking earlier, slipping into the kitchen before anyone else, standing by the window as the world was still blue and quiet. My tea warmed my hands as I thought, not of escape, not of pleading, but of balance. Daniel wanted me silent. Evelyn wanted me invisible. If that was the game, then I would let them think they had won. I would fold myself into the shadows until they forgot I was even there. And while they laughed, while they boasted, while they turned their backs, I would prepare. On Friday, Evelyn's cruelty reached its peak. She and Daniel had friends over for dinner again, and as the plates were served, she leaned in close to me and whispered in a voice only I could hear. "Keep your mouth shut tonight, Margaret. Don't embarrass us again. Or maybe I'll drag your things out on the lawn where everyone can see what you really are." I stared at her for a long moment, and then I smiled. A small, quiet smile that made her frown, because she didn't know what was behind it. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and the guests had gone, I lay in my narrow bed and thought about the house around me. Every picture on the walls, every piece of furniture, every polished fork had been touched by me at some point. Bought with my savings, scrubbed by my hands, kept upright through my sacrifices. They thought they owned it. They thought they owned me. But they had mistaken my silence for defeat. The truth was, silence is a weapon sharper than shouting. It lingers. It waits. It catches people off guard, and when it finally breaks, it cuts deeper than any cruel word ever could. Daniel slammed a door in my face and told me I was embarrassing. Evelyn sneered that I should be grateful just to exist under their roof. They had no idea that every insult had been weaving a rope, and that rope, soon enough, would pull the floor right out from under them. And as I closed my eyes, listening to their muffled voices arguing down the hall, I whispered to myself, "They have no idea what's coming next." Saturday came like any other, except I woke with a steadiness in my bones I hadn't felt in years. The morning was sharp with cold, and sunlight cut through the curtains in narrow stripes. I dressed carefully, not in my faded cardigans, but in the dark blue coat I had saved from my working days. My hair I pinned neatly back, my shoes polished. I wanted them to see me not as the shadow they mocked, but as the woman who had carried them long before they had strength of their own. Daniel stumbled into the kitchen with his usual groggy irritation, slamming the fridge door after grabbing the milk. Evelyn floated in soon after, phone in hand, already barking at one of her friends. I said nothing. I poured myself tea, calm and quiet, and they ignored me like I was part of the furniture. That was good. Ignoring me was their mistake. That afternoon, they had invited more friends over, some from Daniel's work, others Evelyn's drinking circle. They set the table with their best china, filled the house with chatter, and laughed too loudly at nothing at all. Evelyn wore her red dress, the one she saved for nights she wanted to look powerful. Daniel puffed his chest, pretending to be a man in charge. I stayed in the background, clearing glasses, wiping the counter, the way they liked it. But while Evelyn preened for attention, I slipped into the living room. On the low cabinet stood the large box of photographs and albums I had kept since Daniel was a child. Images of birthdays, school plays, his first bicycle, his awkward teenage years. I had preserved them carefully all these decades. He never cared. Evelyn had never even looked. When dessert was brought out, I waited. I waited until Evelyn, with her glass raised high, called for attention. "To family," she declared, smirking as her eyes landed on me. "Even the embarrassing ones we can't seem to get rid of." Laughter burst around the table. Daniel chuckled weakly, not daring to oppose her. That was my moment. I walked calmly to the head of the table and set the heavy box of albums down with a thud. The room went silent. Evelyn's smile froze. Daniel frowned. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Just showing your guests the truth," I said quietly. My voice carried because the room was so still. I opened the first album. There was Daniel at 7, his arms around my neck, cake frosting on his cheeks. There he was in high school, wearing the suit I had bought by pawning my wedding ring. And another, College graduation, the tuition that had nearly broken me to pay, his face glowing with pride while I stood in the back row, invisible even then. The guests leaned closer, whispering. Evelyn tried to laugh. What is this? Old junk? Nobody cares about dusty pictures. But her voice wavered. Because I wasn't finished. I pulled out the letters, his school reports, notes from teachers, receipts for every expense I had covered, evidence of every sacrifice. And finally, the letters from his father before he passed, reminding Daniel to honor his mother, to never forget where he came from. The table was silent except for the sound of paper sliding across the linen. Daniel's face went pale. Evelyn's lips trembled. One of the guests muttered, "She built everything you have, and you treat her like this?" Another shook her head, disgusted. Evelyn snapped, "Stop it! She's manipulating you!" But her voice cracked, her confidence shattered. The guests didn't laugh with her this time. They looked at her the way one looks at something rotten. I straightened my back, my eyes fixed on Daniel. "You told me to keep my mouth shut because I was embarrassing. Tonight, you get to see what embarrassment really looks like, and it isn't me." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No defense came, no anger, just silence as red crept up his neck and his eyes fell to the floor. Evelyn grabbed his arm, hissing, "Say something!" But he didn't. He couldn't. The guests excused themselves one by one, uncomfortable, whispering as they left. The house, once filled with laughter at my expense, was now hollow, quiet, suffocating. I gathered my albums, tucked them neatly back in the box, and carried them down the hall. At the door, I slipped on my coat, my purse already packed. I didn't need their permission anymore. I didn't need their roof. As I stepped outside, the cold air filled my lungs, crisp and clean. Behind me, I heard Evelyn's muffled sobs and Daniel's heavy silence. For once, the door that slammed wasn't mine, it was theirs, shutting themselves inside the prison of their own shame. "Keep your mouth shut, you're embarrassing," my son had said, slamming a door in my face. But when I opened my mouth, the truth poured out, and it was his world that collapsed in front of everyone. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.